The Amrita Bindu Upanishad is also from the Atharva Veda as our last two texts, and all the Upanishads from the Atharva Veda will begin with the same Shanti mantra, which we know well. We'll begin with the prayer. We can recite together. Om Bhadram Karne Vishnuyama Devaha Bhadram Pashyemakshabhir Yajatraha Sthirarangaihi Stuštuvagam Sastanubihi Vyashema Devahyatai Yadayuhu Swasti Nahindro Vruddhashravaha Swasti Nav Pusha Vishwavedaha Swasti Nastarkshyo Harishtanemihi Swasti no Brahaspatir Dadhatu Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Good. Let me get back to the title and we'll introduce our text properly. Good. So this year we've been taking a number of short Upanishads. We started with the Isha Upanishad, then Kaivalya, Mandukya we just concluded, and then this will be the last of the Upanishads that we'll cover in this season's classes. I'll mention that we take a break over the summer months, so we'll finish this class perhaps sometime in May, and then we'll wrap it up until fall. The Upanishads we've covered thus far come in different categories. The Isha Upanishad and Mandukya Upanishad are two of the 10 main Upanishads that we study frequently. These are called main Upanishads only for one particular reason, that particular reason being that Sri Shankaracharya chose to write commentaries on those 10. We also study the Kaivalya Upanishad, which is not one of those 10, but is an Upanishad quite regularly studied because of its subject matter. We're about to take up a very different kind of Upanishad, Amrita Bindu Upanishad. It's different for several reasons. One is, it certainly is not one of the 10 commented upon by Sri Shankaracharya. Second is, it's unlike the other 3 we've studied in a second way as well, and that is, in this way as well, and that is, its language is much later historically. If you look at the language of the Upanishads we've studied, the Isha Upanishad is a very ancient Upanishad. And when I give dates and numbers, you know that I'm just guessing, right? They're educated guesses. We don't know for sure, but at least we can make an educated guess. The Isha Upanishad is definitely the most ancient of the ones we've studied, at least 3,000 years, I'm sure. I'm quite confident of that. The Kaivalya and Mandukya are of somewhat later lineage. And when I give you these numbers, it's based on their language. We don't really have historical guides to go by. So what most Sanskritists do is, based on the nature of the language, you get a pretty good idea for the age of the Sanskrit if you know it well. Just like in English, if you read some Shakespeare, even without knowing it's Shakespeare, just from the sound of the language, you know it's about 400 years old. You can guess that without even being a linguist. So the point I'm making is, if you know the Sanskrit language very well, if you've studied a lot, then based on the style and language, you can guess at the age. Based on the style and language, this Amrita Bindu Upanishad looks brand new, comparatively speaking, maybe 2,000 years. Maybe, again, just a wild guess, maybe 2,000 years old. Also, stylistically, it's extremely simple and straightforward, which is unusual among Upanishads. Upanishads are often obscure and challenging. Remember in our study of Isha Upanishad, we had some very obscure passages we had to get through. You'll find that this Amrita Bindu Upanishad is free from all that obscurity. It's pure Advaita Vedanta. And it reads almost as if somebody wrote it yesterday, because the style is so simple and clear. And no one wrote it yesterday. It's been around for a long time. These Upanishads, I think most of you know, they're collected and added to the end of the Vedas. So to the end of each of the 4 Vedas, there are a number of Upanishads added, perhaps totaling more than 100. And this Amrita Bindu Upanishad then was added to the Atharva Veda. When exactly, we don't know. But you'll see that the content is pure Advaita Vedanta without anything that's obscure. And the style is so simple. It's actually more simple than the Bhagavad Gita. One of the reasons the Bhagavad Gita is so popular is because of its simplicity. This text is more simple than the Bhagavad Gita. So even if you know a little bit of Sanskrit, I think you'll be surprised at how much of it you can understand. And of course, we'll be explaining everything thoroughly. Okay, let's turn to the Upanishad itself. Amrita Bindu Upanishad, breaking the words apart. Amrita Bindu, what a suggestive name. A drop of nectar. Bindu, drop of Amrita, nectar. Or Amrita also has a meaning of immortality. Both of those meanings are there. The nectar of immortality. Just a drop. Why just a drop? Why not an ocean? Why not Amrita Sagara Upanishad? Ocean of Amrita. And there's actually a very concrete reason for that. Amrita Bindu, because you only need a drop. You don't need a sagara. You don't need an ocean. In medicine, if you're taking, and I'm not an expert on medicine, but I think if you take a vaccine, you don't have to be injected with a liter of the vaccine serum, right? I presume a few drops will do. So you get the idea that the serum, because of its effective nature, you don't need a liter, a few drops will do. In the same way for this Amrita. The Amrita, the nectar of immortality we're talking about, is jnanam, knowledge. And the idea is that even a drop of knowledge is enough. If it's the right drop. And the right drop, of course, is the wisdom of the ancient rishis, Tattvamasi. Tattvamasi, that's 3 words. That's a drop. That's not an ocean of words. It is a drop. So you can see from the nature of the title, Amrita Bindu, a drop. A drop is all we need. All right. There are a number of Upanishads that have that name Bindu. There's a Nada Bindu Upanishad. There's a Dhyana Bindu Upanishad. There's a Tejo Bindu Upanishad. There's a Brahma Bindu Upanishad, which is very similar to this one. The texts are almost identical. This one, Amrita Bindu Upanishad. So lots of drops of Upanishads. But ours, Amrita Bindu Upanishad. Let's see what else we need to say by means of introduction. I think that's about it. There are several short commentaries on this text, but the text is so simple, commentaries are almost beside the point. You need a commentary where a text is very obscure or difficult or complicated, and this text is none of those. So I think you'll find this text a refreshing contrast to the texts that we've taken. The texts we've taken have been very heavy and in some places very obscure. And you'll find that this text is very, very straightforward and, as I said, just pure Advaita Vedanta. So I think we'll enjoy it in a very different way. All right, let us begin. The verses, I believe all of them also, are in the Anushtubh Chandas, the 16-syllable meter that's used in most of the Bhagavad Gita. So we can chant it using a simple meter. Repeat after me. Mano hi dvividham proktam, mano hi dvividham shuddham cha shuddhameva cha, shuddham cha shuddhamev, ashuddham kama sankalpam, ashuddham kama shuddham kama vivarjitam, shuddham kama vivarjitam. Well, before I forget, I'll just mention, if any of you didn't know, that these texts are available on our website. You can go and print out your own copy if you want to have that. All right. Manas hi dvividham proktam. Manas, mind. Mano, due to grammatical rules. Manas, hi, indeed, your mind is proktam, said to be dvividham, of two kinds. Mind, in general, is said to be of two kinds, two states of mind, two aspects of mind. What are those? Shuddham cha ashuddham eva cha. The two kinds of mind are a shuddha manas, a pure mind, and an ashuddha manas, an impure mind. Careful now. What does shuddha and ashuddha mean? Depends entirely on context. And if you jump to a conclusion here, you're likely to jump to the wrong conclusion. Let's proceed, and you'll see that the definition of these two words, shuddha and ashuddha, pure and impure with regard to the mind, are given a very unique definition in this text. So first of all, what do we mean by ashuddham? Ashuddham, impure. Ashuddham, kama sankalpam. A mind that is impure is one that has sankalpas, thoughts of kama, desire. An impure mind is a mind filled with desire. To use very simple language, an impure mind is a mind filled with desire. So then what would be a pure mind? A shuddha manas. A pure mind, shuddham, kama, vivarjitam. A pure mind is a mind which is vivarjitam, free from kama, desire. That's a very unusual definition of shuddha and ashuddha. So here in this definition, the ashuddhi, the impurity of the mind, is an impurity in terms of kama, desire. How can desire be considered an impurity? First of all, we recognize that every mind of every person who has ever walked on this planet has had desire. Desire is an absolutely normal human trait to have desires. Yet this text labels it as an impurity. How can kama, desire, be an impurity? What do we mean by impurity? Sometimes we overlook fundamental principles, and the concept of purity is one. Purity and what does the example you've heard me give before? Pure water means what? Is it water that has been sanctified through a ritual? Is that pure water? Or is pure water water without anything else? That's what we mean by pure water. Pure water means H2O without anything else, which means impurities are the presence of something that doesn't belong there. This is our basic definition, and it's important. We use that term ashuddhi or ashuddha in our spiritual discussions many times. Let's be very clear then. Shuddhi, purity, is a natural state. So the natural state of water is H2O. But then along comes ashuddhi, impurities. Impurity is anything that isn't innate to water, anything that doesn't belong there. So here we're talking about mind. Actually, we're not Even though it begins talking about mind, what we're really talking about. I'm going to back up for just a moment. This text begins, the first word of the text is manas, mind. Is this a psychology book? Do you think so? You think the rishis are teaching us about psychology? It begins with mind, but obviously that's not the tatparya. Tatparya means the intended focus of the text. The intended focus of this text, the tatparya of this text, is most certainly not with reference to the mind, but rather with reference to your true nature, Atma. Your true nature, Atma, being non-separate from the reality of the cosmos, Brahman. This is what all of Vedanta teaches. This was taught in the Isha Upanishad, in the Kaivalya Upanishad, Mandukya. We see it here in Amrita Bindu. We'll see that same teaching in all of these Vedantic Upanishads. That's the Amrita Bindu. That's that drop of wisdom, that drop of nectar of immortality, is that knowledge. So the tatparya of this text it's really not about mind. It's really about the reality of who you are. Now, we have to apply the words pure and impure with regard to that reality. With regard to who you are, Satchidananda Atma, purity means Satchidananda Atma, nothing else. That's a pure condition. An impure condition means Satchidananda Atma plus something else. In this case, the something else is labeled here as kama, desire, but we're going to go a little deeper in just a moment. So, let's try this. Satchidananda Atma, just to make sure we're not using this as an abstraction. We're talking about you. We're talking about your experience. When I use the term Satchidananda Atma, I hope you know that we're talking about you as a conscious being. You as a conscious being, but that consciousness being unborn and uncreated, unchanging, and boundaryless. That you, that conscious being, that core of your existence. So, if all that was present right now in this experience was that conscious being, Satchidananda Atma, consciousness, unborn, uncreated, unchanging, boundaryless, limitless, full, complete. Go on adding adjectives. If that's all that's present right now, any problems? That's great. If all that is present in the moment is Satchidananda Atma, there's absolutely no problem because it's a condition. It is innately, Atma is innately full and complete and free from any kind of limitation, problem, incompleteness, inadequacy, any source of suffering, all of that utterly absent from Satchidananda Atma as such. Then along comes a little problem. That little problem in this verse is called kama. Kama, desire. Meaning, in fact, in the Bhagavad Gita class, I gave this example. You're sitting comfortably in a chair. Everything is so nice. And you're so content. And you're at total peace. And then a thought pops in your mind. A cup of tea would be really nice right now. And what's interesting is that desire for a cup of tea, as trivial as it is sufficient to deprive you of the contentment and peace you had moments before. Moments before you were just relaxing comfortably in your chair, enjoying yourself. Now you're thinking, I really like some tea. And then you might have a conflict because you're not inclined to get out of the chair to make yourself a cup of tea. And if there's no one around to make a cup of tea for you, then you're going to sit there feeling deprived of a cup of tea, which will then deny you contentment and peace. A silly cup of tea is all it takes to deprive you of contentment, peace. That is the power of desire. In fact, we had a long discussion in our Bhagavad Gita class about this. We just introduced that topic of desire. And one thing we made clear is any single desire is all it takes to deprive you of peace and contentment. Tell me, how many desires do you think you have? If you were to try to write them out, how many pages would it take to write down all the desires you might have in a given day, in a given week, in your lifetime? It would be a long list. Consider that the presence of any one of those desires in that long list is all it takes to deprive you of perfect peace and unbroken contentment. Kama is the antithesis of contentment. By definition, right? What does that word contentment mean? It must mean absence of desire. In the presence of desire, there's no contentment. There's only contentment in the absence of desire. But then how to be free from desire? Suppose you get that cup of tea, and after your cup of tea, then you're content again until the next desire comes. And oftentimes, in fact, usually, the desires, do your desires come one at a time? With gaps in between? Or is it more likely that we get flooded by desires? So, do you see why this text begins with manas, mind, and immediately turning to the problem of desire? So now we've seen this rather unconventional definition. That is, a mind, manas, which is ashuddham, is a mind which is full of desire. A mind which is shuddham, pure, is a mind which is free from desire. But now, how are we going to get rid of these desires? We got a long way to go. This is the opening statement of the text. Let's see where we go from here. Manaheva manushyanam, manaheva manushyanam, karanam bandha mokshayoho, karanam bandha bandhaya vishayasaktam, bandhaya vishayasaktam, muktam nirvishayam smritam, muktam nirvishayam. The first line of this verse is frequently quoted by Vedanta teachers, including Shankaracharya. In fact, it's one of the most famous I can't say it's one of the most famous quotations because I don't think it's quoted as much as it should be. And this is my opinion. This is an incredibly profound statement. It is found in many Vedantic texts and commentaries. In those few words, I'm just talking about the first line. Those few words say so much. Look at the first line. Manas eva, the sakara of manas drops due to grammatical rules. Manas eva, mind alone, manushyanam, for people, for all people. The mind alone is the karanam, the cause. The cause for what? Bandha mokshayoho. The cause for bandha, bondage, and moksha, liberation. Simply put, mind alone is the cause for people's bondage and for their liberation. One psychologist put it very nicely. He said, it's all in your mind. That's right. That's exactly what this verse is saying. Tell me, kama is located where? Desire is located where? It's in your mind. The problem of desire is in your mind. the solution to the problem of desire is also in your mind. Wherever is the locus of the problem, that will be the locus of the solution. If the problem is you have a broken toe, the solution is going to be to treat the broken toe. Where the problem is will be the solution. Similarly, some of you know there are these psychosomatic illnesses. A psychosomatic illness is a real illness. That is, you can have psychosomatic headaches. A psychosomatic headache is a headache. The head pounds. It throbs. It really hurts. But then why do they call it a psychosomatic headache? Is they say that the origin of the headache is not the physical brain. The origin of the headache is mind. You can have other psychosomatic symptoms. Suppose you have, and I'm just making this stuff up. Again, I don't know anything much about medicine. Suppose you have an itch right here. Just goes on itching. 24/7 goes on itching. Could be a nuisance. So you go and see a doctor, you get a referral to a dermatologist or whoever does all of this stuff. And they do all of these tests and all of this. And they determine that there is no physiological reason whatsoever for your itch. So they say, imagine a doctor, they won't do this, but imagine a doctor says, no, you don't have an itch. What would you say? Doctor says, we ran all the tests, you don't itch. But it itches. 24/7. It itches. So, this is something I hope you understand about medicine, and that is the source of a physical symptom could be from your body, but the source of that physical symptom could be your mind. But please note, the physical symptom is absolutely real. Even if it comes from the mind, it's just as real. An itch born of your nervous system and an itch born of your mind, they both itch. They both can drive you crazy. So the point I'm making is there are certain problems whose locus is the mind. A physiological itch, maybe you need a physiological solution, but suppose it's a psychosomatic itch. It is born of your mind somehow, in which case the solution must take place in the mind. One of the most profound observations of the ancient rishis is that the problem of bondage, and bondage here in Vedantic language, bondage means being stuck in a life of suffering. That's what we mean by bondage. Being bound to a life of suffering. And if that's not bad enough, the bondage extends from this life to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. So it's not merely being bound to a life of suffering, but it's being bound to a continuous series of lives of suffering. This is bondage. Moksha is liberation, freedom from suffering in this life, freedom from suffering in any future life. And that bondage and moksha, in the vision of the ancient rishis, is, to use modern language, psychosomatic. Seriously, our bondage is psychosomatic. Do I get psychosomatic itch? There's nothing wrong with my body or my skin, but it itches. Why? So my mind, pardon my American English, my mind is messed up. My mind is screwed up, therefore I itch. My mind is messed up, my mind is screwed up, therefore I have desire. That's exactly what's being said here. Desire, we're about to discover, we've already gone through these topics, but we're going to come right back to it here. Desire is a product of ignorance. This is one of the profound recognitions of the ancient rishis. Desire is a product of, in American English, messed up thinking. In more proper English, desire is a product of ignorance. therefore psychosomatic in nature. Its locus is the mind. How can we say that desire is a product of ignorance? Well, if you recognized your true nature as Satchidananda Atma, and you're sitting in your chair, and go back to that story, you're sitting in your chair comfortably, and then the thought, oh, I'd like a cup of tea, comes, but then you reflect, I am Satchidananda Atma. Satchidananda Atma, in the absence of a cup of tea, is still Satchidananda Atma. I am full and complete in spite of the absence of a cup of tea. This is Atma Vidya. This is self-knowledge. With that self-knowledge, when you have vividly, personally discovered your own fullness, your own completeness, your own perfection of Satchidananda Atma, when you've made that discovery, who cares about the cup of tea? And who cares about much more serious things as well? That is, unfulfilled desires will not deprive you of contentment if you've made this discovery that your true nature as Satchidananda Atma remains full and complete no matter what. If there's one unfulfilled desire or 100 unfulfilled desires, there's no loss of that sense of contentment or peace. Now that may sound a little self-contradictory. We said that freedom from desire means contentment. I just described, if you followed my language, I just described the possibility of being content in the presence of desire. Is it possible to be content in the presence of desire? I sure hope so, because as we said, we have thousands and millions of desires, and they're going to keep coming. So if your contentment, we joked about this before, if your contentment depends on getting rid of your last desire, good luck. Remember, those of you who were in the Bhagavad Gita class, the Laddu story. I won't tell. It's a long story. I won't go back over all of that. But the point is, if you have 1,000 desires, it's only the fulfillment of the last one that counts. If you have just to make that clear, if you have 1,000 desires and you fulfill 999 of them, are you content? By definition, no. All right, so this is what we're up against. So, is it possible to be content in the presence of desire? And here it would be helpful to describe two different kinds of desire. In Sanskrit language, there's desire with asakti, attachment, and desire without asakti, attachment. In more simple English, we call them binding desires and non-binding desires. I believe this language came from my Padma Guru, Swami Chinmayananda Ji. So this distinction of binding and non-binding desires, this particular choice of words. A binding desire is one in whose absence and in whose non-fulfillment you feel discontent. A binding desire is a desire that when unfulfilled, you suffer. A non-binding desire is a desire whose non-fulfillment doesn't bother you at all. Sorry to keep going back to that Gita. Actually, I don't think I gave this example in the Gita class. I gave it someplace else. I'm not sure where. Recently, though. The Fruit Loop example. Did I give it in satsang maybe? I don't even remember where. Yeah. Oh, in a short article. This is just a favorite story. I made it up just to illustrate the difference between a binding and non-binding desire. Suppose you have a 4-year-old child. And it's Saturday morning, breakfast time. She goes to the kitchen. She climbs up on your kitchen cabinet. She opens up the door of her cabinet looking for her favorite cereal. What is her favorite cereal? Fruit Loops. There are 10 boxes of cereal on the shelf. Mom is a good mom. 10 boxes of cereal on there. Unfortunately, none of the 10 are Fruit Loops. By the time this 4-year-old child has figured out there are no Fruit Loops, she starts crying and screaming, "Mom, there's no Fruit Loops." Like it's the end of the world. I'm not a parent, many of you are. You've been through this, I'm sure, many times. No Fruit Loops. Fine. Suppose you go to the same cabinet and you've decided you're going to have breakfast cereal, and you probably have a favorite cereal. Probably not Fruit Loops, but it could be. Suppose you happen to like Fruit Loops. You go to the same cabinet looking for Fruit Loops. There are 10 boxes of cereal, no Fruit Loops. Do you start crying? There are 10 boxes there. You grab another one and you have your breakfast. The 4-year-old had a desire for Fruit Loops. You also had a desire for Fruit Loops. When the 4-year-old's desire was not fulfilled, she started crying like anything. When your desire for Fruit Loops was not fulfilled, you just grabbed another box of cereal. How simple can it be to describe the difference between a binding and a non-binding desire? A desire which is full of asakti, attachment, and a desire which is free from asakti, attachment. And remember our definition of attachment. The Sanskrit word asakti is good. But if we're going to use the English, attachment means this clinging dependence. That's a good expression, clinging dependence. In the absence of it, you feel miserable. Attachment is when it's absent, you feel miserable. If it's present, you're okay. You look upon it as essential for your well-being. To look upon anything as essential for your well-being is attachment. That's a good definition. To look upon a person, a thing, or a situation as essential for your well-being, that's our definition of attachment. So obviously, you didn't look upon Fruit Loops as being essential for your well-being. The 4-year-old did, and that determines the difference then between binding and non-binding desires. So, when there is even one binding desire in your mind, you are discontent. You are in a state of bandha, bondage, bound to suffer, stuck with your suffering. The Vedantic solution we're going to discover, and we're going to have some more discussion about this in a couple of verses, is to be free from that clinging aspect of desire. Not to be totally desireless. And actually, as long as I'm on this topic, let me go there, because otherwise we'll be jumping back and forth. Sometimes we get this rather naive notion of enlightenment as a condition of utter desirelessness. So here's another stupid story I made up to describe this situation. Suppose you have someone who you know to be enlightened, and you invite him or her out to dinner. And suppose it's a her. It's always him usually in all the stories. We'll make it her. So you invite her out to dinner, and you're at a nice restaurant. And the waiter comes and gives with the menu. The waiter comes back and asks your guest, "What would you like?" And your enlightened guest looks at her menu and says, "I don't want anything." Yeah, but which of these dishes would you enjoy eating? I'll enjoy them all, any of them. Is that what it means to be desireless? Which do you want? I don't care. Doesn't it sound a little naive? So, we made that differentiation between binding and non-binding desires. So, your enlightened guest can have a non-binding desire for a particular dish. She says, I'll have this item. Just to illustrate, one more illustration. Have you ever been to a restaurant with someone who's a little bit difficult? And they say, they tell the waiter or waitress, I'd like this item. And they say, I'm sorry, we don't have that today. And the response is, what? It's on your menu. What's wrong with this? If it's you... Some people are like that. It's just an item on the menu, and there's a binding desire. Imagine your enlightened guest. She says, I'll have this. The waiter says, sorry, we don't have that. And the enlightened guest says, okay, I'll have this one instead. Nope, we were out of that one. Then I'll have this. No, sorry. How about this one? Nope. What do you have? We have a green salad. That's what I'll have. This is freedom. This is moksha. Moksha is not a state, let's be very clear. Moksha is not a state of indifference. Moksha doesn't mean indifference. Moksha means inner freedom. So it means if you can get what you want, fine. If you can't get what you want, no problem. There is a moksha, as opposed to the bandha, the bondage. All right, enough said. And as we began to say, this bondage and moksha, bondage that causes suffering due to attachment to having desires fulfilled, and moksha, freedom from suffering caused by having desires which are unfulfilled, which deprive you of contentment, this problem is in your mind. It's like a psychosomatic illness. That's actually very good news. Psychosomatic illnesses are not real. They're not real physical illnesses. And be careful now, because Vedanta has a unique definition of real. Suppose the problem of bondage was real. In Vedantic language, that which is real, trikala abaditam. That which is real is present in the past, present currently, and present in the future. It won't go away. That which is real won't go away, won't change. The problem of bondage is not real. Atma is real. Satchidananda Atma fulfills that definition of real. It is unchanging. It is full and complete in the past, present, and future. Then we could really say that Atma, if you're following this, Atma has no problem. If I have a psychosomatic itch, my body has no problem. Atma has no problem. Atma doesn't need Vedanta. Atma doesn't need to get enlightened. Atma doesn't need to come to these Tuesday night classes. On the other hand, if there's a problem in the mind which deprives one of fullness and completeness, then we need these teachings. So this statement, Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayoho, in just those few words, there's such a vision unfolded there. The problem, the locus of the problem is your mind. The locus of the solution is your mind. Atma doesn't need anything. The problem is one of ignorance in your mind. We said before, ignorance of your true nature. If you know yourself to be full and complete, we didn't make this connection. If you know yourself to be full and complete, no matter what, is it possible to have a binding desire? If you know yourself to be full and complete, you can have many non-binding desires, like the enlightened person who wanted a particular dish. But if you know yourself to be Satchidananda Atma, consciousness, unborn, unchanging, boundaryless, limitless, full, complete, if that's your vision of yourself, it's not possible to have a binding desire. It simply is not possible. It's like if you were Bill Gates and you lost a $100 bill, would you think twice about it? The point I'm making is when there's such fullness, in this case financial fullness, in the presence of financial fullness, there's no sense of loss. In the presence of, I can't say spiritual fullness, sounds terrible. If you know yourself to be full and complete, there's nothing that could detract from your fullness and completeness. All right. So this mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayoho. To conclude that statement, with the discovery of your true nature as Satchidananda Atma, this is my Guru's language, all your binding desires will be converted into non-binding desires. Reflect on that for a moment. You have lots of binding desires. If you discovered yourself to be Satchidananda Atma, all those desires would still be present. For example, before enlightenment, if you like coffee, after enlightenment, what? You still like coffee. That's not going to change. What will change is, before enlightenment, if you can't get a cup of coffee, you're grumpy. After enlightenment, if you can't get a cup of coffee, it's okay. Non-binding desire. So the result then of this freedom, the bandha, the bondage, and moksha means to convert your binding desires into non-binding desires. All of that takes place in your mind. A mind which is filled with binding desires in a state of bandha, bondage, all of the binding desires as a result of self-knowledge. As a result of self-knowledge, all of the binding desires are converted to non-binding desires, and that becomes the cause for moksha. And continuing, bandhaya vishaya asaktam. This is exactly what we've been talking about. Vishaya asaktam, asakti, attachment to vishaya, objects, longing for objects, desire for objects, dependence on objects. Objects would include people and situations. Any kind of dependency, asakti, attachment, all of that is bandhaya, leads you further into bondage, leads you to continue to suffer. Why will you... If someone were to ask, Swamiji, why is it that having desires necessarily causes suffering? Because logically speaking, you can make an argument, if you can fulfill desires as they arise, there's no problem. You want a cup of tea? Get a cup of tea. You want to go for a walk? Go for a walk. So if you can fulfill desires as they arise, there's no problem, right? Is that a reasonable statement? Fulfill desires continually as they arise. Some desires are easily fulfilled. Many desires are not easily fulfilled. Some desires are impossible to fulfill. So any naive notion of gaining contentment through fulfilling desires. By the way, isn't that the basic worldly attitude? Get contentment by fulfilling desires. If you have more desires, work harder. Very American, right? More desires, work harder. Accomplish more, get more. But you will never get contentment in that way. You get moments of happiness, absolutely. Moments of contentment and peace, moments of happiness. But unbroken contentment, uninterrupted peace, never. So that's bondage, bandhaya, Vishaya asaktam. This attachment to objects, this dependence on objects, bandhaya, leads to bondage. Muktam nirvishayam smritam. But it is understood, literally it is remembered, but it means it is understood that muktam, that freedom is nirvishayam, freedom from vishaya, objects. And we're going to see, we have an interesting discussion. We'll just begin. I think we can. Muktam nirvishayam smritam. Freedom from objects is mukti. This is a very interesting point, and I'm hesitant to get into it here at the end of this class. So we'll talk about one or two other things just to finish up the class. But there's something very significant here. I don't want to open it up right here at the end of the class. If your contentment and peace depends on objects, how reliable is that? When your contentment and peace, like it does for so many people, depends on a certain person in your life. Pardon me for making this point, but a formula for misery is to depend on your spouse to make you happy. If you want to be miserable, depend on not your spouse, anyone. Depend on your parents, depend on your children. If you depend on anyone to make you happy, you are guaranteed to create a life of misery for yourself. Why? As much as that person loves you, and they may love you dearly, don't they have their own problems? So that person that you depend upon for your contentment and peace, for your sense of well-being, suppose they have a splitting headache and they say, "Leave me alone." And the sad thing is, instead of saying, "Oh, you have a headache, what can I do to help you?" Instead of feeling that, if you depend on them so much for your contentment, instead of asking what you can do to help them, you will feel hurt. You'll feel deprived. "Oh, my needs aren't being met." That thought, it won't come exactly in those words. But you will feel neglected. You could feel resentment because your special person is not able to respond to your needs at that particular moment. This is bondage. This bondage that we talk about in Vedanta is not some theoretical bondage. It is suffering. And bandhaya vishaya asaktam. Any dependence is a source of suffering. Whatever you depend on is a source of suffering. Now you might think, well, wait a minute. Aren't there some things we absolutely rely upon? We depend upon. Food and water. Shelter. Absolutely. Then what would happen? Let's just play this out a little bit. What would happen to an enlightened person deprived of food and water? An unenlightened person deprived of food and water will get thirsty, hungry, and eventually they'll die. An enlightened person deprived of food and water will also get thirsty and hungry, and after a long enough period of time they'll also die. Well then, where is the distinction between these two? The distinction is really, if you could talk to these people, the distinction would be absolutely obvious. The unenlightened person will be complaining and complaining and complaining. They'll be absolutely miserable. They'll be resentful, they'll be blaming you, they'll blame the world, they'll blame God, they'll just be full of so much anger, frustration, resentment because they can't get food and water, and they will die with their mind filled with all of this anger, frustration, resentment, turmoil. The enlightened person, dying, so these two people, they're both, we should make a story out. This is how stories are born. The enlightened person and the unenlightened person shipwrecked. Make up a story. And so the unenlightened person just day after day crying and screaming and just full of bitterness and resentment and anger and all of this stuff. And the enlightened person just patiently listening and nodding, oh, yes, really, uh-huh. The enlightened person listening to the other person complaining, taking the role of therapist, I suppose, trying to help the other guy feel a little better. The enlightened person is also dying. They're both physically suffering in identical manners. But what a dramatic difference of experience. The unenlightened person is dying in a state of absolute turmoil. The enlightened person, if there's no food, if they're shipwrecked or they're on a boat floating in the water, no food, no water, no shore, no nothing, and dying, the enlightened person will suffer the same physical symptoms, the same thirst, the same pain, everything exactly the same. But the enlightened person will die without undergoing all that mental anguish. The experiences of the two couldn't be more different, in spite of the fact that they're physiologically undergoing the same horrible ordeal. In terms of experience, final point, experience takes place where? Suppose your body is suffering from thirst and hunger. Where does the experience of thirst and hunger take place? Does the experience of hunger really take place in your stomach? If you understand the way the mind and brain work, does the experience of thirst really take place in the throat? Turns out all experience, without exception, takes place in our minds. All experience takes place in our minds. Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha moksha yoho. All experience takes place in our mind. Suffering takes place in our mind. The solution to the problem of suffering takes place in our minds. This is Vedanta. What a shame. We'll come back to the text in our next class. What a shame when so many people say Vedanta is a lot of abstract philosophy that doesn't have any direct bearing on day-to-day life. How misguided that kind of conclusion is. Although in their defense, that kind of misguided conclusion is based on reading a lot of poorly written books on Vedanta. There's lots of poorly written books on Vedanta which lead people to this conclusion that Vedanta is a lot of philosophy, a lot of idealism, a lot of lofty spiritual spiritual teachings, concepts. But from our discussion here, and you've probably heard me say this, Vedanta is a set of teachings meant to address human suffering. The goal of Vedanta is to put an end to suffering. How does it put an end to suffering? The locus of suffering is in the mind due to the non-recognition of your true nature as Satchidananda Atma. This is the source of suffering. Therefore, the solution, be careful now, if the problem is desire, this is being a little oversimplified. If the problem is desire, the solution is fulfill the desire. Wait a minute. The problem is desire, but that desire has a root cause. Desire is not the root cause. Desire is actually an effect of the root cause. What is the root cause? Failure to recognize your own innate fullness and completeness and contentment, your true nature. The root cause of suffering is not desire. The root cause of suffering then is ignorance. Self-non-recognition is a term my guru likes to use. Failure to recognize your true nature. If the problem is ignorance, the solution is knowledge. Ignorance, the locus of ignorance is your mind. The locus where knowledge takes place is the mind. Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha moksha yoho. What a brilliant statement. Good. We'll come back to our text and continue with the third verse in our next class. We'll conclude with our prayers. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha sarve santu niramayaha sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.